The discoveries presented in this video are relevant to everyone, regardless of your religion or whether you have no religion at all, and regardless of whether you consider the stories of the Bible to be historical or fictional. This video presents evidence that one of the most widely read books in the world contains a previously unrecognized mathematical code. The implications of this evidence extend far beyond religion. They raise important questions about mathematics, consciousness, the nature of reality, and how intelligence can be embedded in information. Regardless of one's beliefs, these questions are universal and deserve serious investigation. It all begins with the book of Esther, where a hidden mathematical code is revealed, beginning with one of the Bible's greatest unanswered questions: the significance of God's concealed name. That question begins with one of the most discussed features of the book of Esther: the absence of God's explicit name, the Tetragrammaton, the 4 Hebrew letters Yod-He and Vav-He. Across different cultures and religious traditions, this divine name has been referred to as Adonai, Hashem, Yahweh, Jehovah, Yehovah, and other substitute forms. For centuries, the Tetragrammaton has been surrounded by mystery. Its origin, meaning, and even its exact pronunciation remain uncertain. The evidence presented in this video reveals a deeper understanding of the divine name and its importance. While the divine name of God first appears in Genesis 2:4, its notable omission from the book of Esther appears to be deliberate. The easiest way for the author to establish religious authority would have been to simply include God's name directly. Instead, the intention was for Esther to be examined in a deep and profound way, revealing a divine code that extends far beyond the surface story. The absence of God's name is not a weakness of the text, it is the key. What appears to be missing is actually the very mechanism through which an authentic code is revealed. In this presentation, I will introduce the most groundbreaking evidence for a mathematical code within the Hebrew Bible, also known as the Old Testament, found in the precise and symmetrical alignment of God's name with the name Esther in the book of Esther. This is not the widely debated Bible code. The patterns presented in this video are fundamentally different in both method and design. The methodology is transparent, objective, and fully reproducible. Now let's begin unraveling one of the Bible's greatest mysteries, one that has remained hidden for over 2,400 years, waiting for such a time as this. There is a perfect and extraordinary symmetry between God's name and Esther's name, one that is revealed through a simple count of the words. The Tetragrammaton, which means 4 letters in Greek and is considered the divine name for God, appears for the first time at the 477th word in Genesis. Like the Tetragrammaton, Esther in Hebrew is also a 4-letter word. In the book of Esther, God's name is deliberately hidden, yet incredibly, the name Esther is also found for the first time at the 477th word in the book. Even at first glance, this feels deeply significant. What are the odds that the first appearance of God's name in Genesis and the first appearance of Esther's name in the book of Esther would occur at the exact same word position of 477? Aside from the numerical patterns, there is also a literary symmetry. In Genesis, God's name is openly revealed, and in Esther, the Tetragrammaton is famously hidden. The Persian meaning of the name Esther is star. However, the Hebrew meaning is hidden, aligning with the theme of God's name being hidden in the book of Esther. Having established the perfect symmetry of God's name and Esther's name at the word level, I will now show that their letter positions and gematria values are aligned as well. Each Hebrew letter is assigned a numerical value through a system known as gematria, a practice that dates back to antiquity. Here are 4 key numbers that identify God's name and Esther's name. The first appearance of the name Esther occurs at the 1926th letter in the book of Esther. The first appearance of the Tetragrammaton occurs at the 1849th letter in Genesis. The simple gematria numbers for the Hebrew name Esther are 1642. Aleph is 1, Samach is 6, Tav is 4, and Resh is 2. Hebrew is read from right to left, so the numerical values of its letters are calculated in that order, producing 1642. The simple gematria numbers for God's name are 1565. Yud is 1, He is 5, Vav is 6, and He is 5. Now watch what these numbers do. This is where the structure becomes truly remarkable. 1926 minus 1849 is 77, and 1642 minus 1565 is also 77. In other words, the difference between the first letter positions of Esther's name and God's name is 77, and the difference between the simple gematria numbers for Esther and God is also 77. These are 2 very different measurements with one identical result, 77 and 77. The exact same difference repeats twice. Now let's look at another pattern. Earlier, we saw that the difference between Esther and God's name was 77 in 2 different measurements. Here, a new distance appears. 1926 minus 1642 is 284, and 1849 minus 1565 is also 284. In other words, the difference between Esther's first letter position and her simple gematria numbers is 284, and the difference between God's first letter position and the simple gematria numbers of the Tetragrammaton is also 284. These are 2 separate calculations, yet they produce the exact same result, 284 and 284. The same difference repeats again. Now let's take the pattern one step further. We have 4 key numbers, 1926 and 1642 on the left, and 1849 and 1565 on the right. 1926 minus 1849 equals 77, and 1642 minus 1565 also equals 77. 1926 minus 1642 equals 284, and 1849 minus 1565 also equals 284. In other words, despite being 4 completely different numbers, the values for God's name and Esther's name produce the exact same pair of distances, 77 and 77, 284 and 284. These 4 numbers form a perfect numerical rectangle with 2 equal horizontal distances of 77 and 2 equal vertical distances of 284. The numbers associated with God's name and Esther's name therefore produce not only arithmetic symmetry, but geometric symmetry as well, revealing an additional layer of structure within the pattern. Now the pattern becomes even more extraordinary. Watch what happens when we take 3 of the 4 numbers and perform a simple calculation. We begin with 1926, Esther's first letter position. We add 1565, the simple gematria numbers of God's name. Then we subtract 1849, the first letter position of God's name. The result is 1642, the simple gematria numbers of Esther's name. This means that 3 of the numbers perfectly reconstruct the 4th number. And here we see how it works the other way too. We begin with 1849, the first letter position of God's name. We add 1642, the simple gematria numbers of Esther's name. Then we subtract 1926, the first letter position of Esther's name. The result is 1565, the simple gematria numbers of God's name. So we see that the relationship works in both directions. If one number disappears, the other 3 can reconstruct it perfectly. In other words, if you know any 3 of the numbers, you can rebuild the 4th number. The numbers are not acting independently. Rather than just being 4 isolated numbers, they form a single interconnected mathematical system. The numbers keep folding back into each other in a repeating pattern, like a math circle with no beginning or end. Here we see the complete set of number values associated with God's name and Esther's name. No matter which number is missing, the remaining 3 numbers reproduce it exactly, and therefore form a closed algebraic system. 1642 equals 1926 plus 1565 minus 1849. 1565 equals 1849 plus 1642 minus 1926. 1926 equals 1849 plus 1642 minus 1565. 1849 equals 1926 plus 1565 minus 1642. Think of it like 4 corners of a perfectly balanced frame. The same distances repeat so precisely that the numbers loop endlessly back into themselves. Here is the detailed breakdown of the letter positions and gematria values of the names of God and Esther. What is remarkable is that mathematically, God's name depends on Esther's name, and Esther's name depends on God's name. Each name is derived from the other, completing the other within the equation. Together, the 2 names form one balanced system of extraordinary precision, dependency, and symmetry. If you remove one, the entire symmetry collapses. The irony is impossible to ignore. Although the name of God is hidden in the book of Esther on the surface, the names of God and Esther appear inseparably connected beneath the structure of the text. We see even more perfect connections in how Esther's numerical identity completes the numerical identity of God's name, and vice versa. When we add the opposite pairs together, both sums equal the exact same number. 1926 plus 1565 equals 3491, and 1849 plus 1642 also equals 3491. More specifically, the letter position of Esther plus the simple gematria numbers of God's name totals 3491, and the letter position of God's name plus the simple gematria numbers of Esther also totals 3491. 2 completely different calculations, yet both produce the exact same result of 3491 and 3491. The symmetry now works in every direction. It is truly remarkable that a simple set of numbers can generate such a rich and symmetrical structure, containing multiple dense and independent patterns. Yet the symmetry does not stop there. The first appearance of the Tetragrammaton and Esther's name, their verse positions, word positions, and letter placements within their respective verses also reveal hidden symmetry in every direction. On the left side, we look at the letter positions within the verse itself. In Esther 2:7, the name Esther appears beginning at the 17th letter of the verse. In Genesis 2:4, the name for God appears beginning at the 34th letter of the verse. And when those two positions are added together, 17 plus 34, they equal 51. On the right side, we look at the verse numbers of the first occurrence. Esther first appears in verse 2:7, and God first appears in verse 2:4. And once again, the numbers combine to produce the exact same total. 27 plus 24 also equals 51. So two completely different systems, letter position and verse position, both sum to the same number, 51 and 51. So we have another perfect match between God and Esther, and another layer of symmetry hidden inside the text. Here we see the breakdown of the matching totals of 51 that I showed on the previous slide. Notice the mirrored movements between the letter positions and the verses where Esther and God's name first appear. 17 to 24 is plus 7, and 34 to 27 is minus 7. And 24 to 34 is plus 10, and 27 to 17 is minus 10. The pattern mirrors itself in both directions, plus 7 and plus 10 and minus 10. This creates a perfect zero-sum balance in which the movements precisely counterbalance each other. Then, both pairs produce the same total. 17 plus 34 equals 51, and 24 plus 27 also equals 51. So we see the same pattern in two ways: mirrored distances and matching totals. Here we see the patterns formed by the first appearances of God's name and Esther's name, including their exact word positions within their respective verses. On the left, for the first appearance of God, the key numbers are verse 2:4, word 8, and letter 34. On the right, for the first appearance of Esther, the key numbers are verse 2:7, word 6, and letter 17. These six numbers, 24, 8, and 34 for the Tetragrammaton, and 27, 6, and 17 for Esther, form the basis of the calculations shown in the center. Remarkably, no matter how these numbers are paired and regrouped, the calculations repeatedly sum to the same value of 65. For example, 6 plus 17 equals 23, and 8 plus 34 equals 42. Then 23 plus 42 equals 65. 27 plus 6 equals 33, and 24 plus 8 equals 32. Then 33 plus 32 also equals 65. 6 plus 8 equals 14, and 17 plus 34 equals 51. Then 14 plus 51 also equals 65. The same result appears in all six pairings shown here. The numerical positions of the first appearance of God's name and Esther repeatedly produce the number 65. Interestingly, 65 is the gematria value of Adonai, meaning Lord, the traditional Jewish substitute for pronouncing the Tetragrammaton. As presented in this video, the remarkable symmetry between the first appearance of God's name and Esther's name is revealed in every direction, including their first word appearances within their respective books, the positions of their first letters within their respective books, their numerical values through gematria, the exact verses in which they first appear, and their precise word and letter positions within those verses. The patterns presented in this study are so precise and consistent that they are extremely unlikely to be the result of coincidence. This evidence demonstrates that an authentic Bible code exists within the Bible, revealed through the relationship between the Tetragrammaton and the name Esther. Together, they provide one of the strongest foundations for demonstrating the existence of such a code. Some of the greatest intellectual minds in history believe the Bible contained hidden codes and ciphers, including Isaac Newton, who reportedly spent more time attempting to decipher scripture than he did studying physics. Newton described the Bible as a cryptogram set by the Almighty. He believed the biblical text was intentionally written with profound depth rather than surface-level simplicity, and that its hidden codes were meant to be uncovered using reason, mathematics, and pattern recognition. For the most accurate, evidence-based text, I used the Leningrad Codex, the oldest complete surviving Hebrew manuscript containing the Book of Esther, and therefore the strongest direct textual evidence currently available. My companion research paper, which explains the methodology, is available on Substack at Esther Deutsch and is linked in the YouTube description. Because the book of Esther was written well after Genesis, it may appear that only Esther's name was aligned with the Tetragrammaton, meaning the mathematical relationship between God's name and Esther's name would not be truly reciprocal. However, this explanation does not readily account for the additional compelling patterns I discovered involving Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess after whom Esther was named. In Hebrew, the spellings of Esther and Ishtar are nearly identical, differing only by a single letter and gematria number. These patterns involving the name Ishtar appear within the very first word and the first verse of Genesis, providing additional evidence that the underlying design extends beyond the book of Esther itself. Instead, they connect back to the opening of Genesis and the name traditionally associated with her origins, further confirming the significance of Esther's name, which I will present in the future. Not only are there impressive patterns between the first mention of God's name and the name of Esther, but we also find a striking symmetry between the first appearance of God's name and the opening verse of the book of Esther. Genesis 2:4 is a review of the creation account introduced in the first verse of Genesis, but it also introduces something entirely new. It's the first time God's personal name, the Tetragrammaton, appears in the Bible, which we see here. Incredibly, Genesis 2:4 and the first verse of Esther share the exact same Hebrew gematria value of 3,462. This creates another precise numerical connection between the verse where God's name first appears and the book of Esther where God's name is never mentioned at all. A key factor that we notice in the symmetries between the Tetragrammaton and Esther's name is that the precise placement of words, letters, verses, and gematria values appears to be deliberate and meaningful. In forthcoming presentations, I will demonstrate how this code continues and is further confirmed in Esther 8:9, the longest verse in the Bible, which also aligns remarkably with pi, the Fibonacci sequence, and the golden ratio. Again, the irony is hard to ignore. Although God's name never appears in Esther, the book contains both the longest verse and the longest Hebrew word in the Bible, suggesting that what appears absent on the surface is revealed more deeply within the structure of the text. And that is exactly what we find. Here is a brief preview of my numerous discoveries in Esther 8:9, revealing how the hidden code was present in plain sight all along. The longest verse in the Bible does not simply contain numbers. Every number mentioned in the verse is encoded within the verse itself, creating self-reinforcing patterns. Starting with the first self-reinforcing pattern, we see the number 3 mentioned twice, hashlishi and bishlosha. Both mean 3 in Hebrew. Between the first mention of the number 3 and the second mention of the number 3, there are exactly 3 words. 1, 2, 3. Moving on to the second self-reinforcing pattern, we see the number 20 mentioned twice, esrim and esrim. Esrim means 20 in Hebrew. From the first mention of the word 20 to the second mention of the word 20, there are exactly 20 words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. In the third self-reinforcing pattern, we see the number 127 mentioned. Sheva ve'esrim umeya means 127 in Hebrew. The 127th letter of the verse spells out 127. These patterns suggest a profound intentional structure woven into the letters, words, and numbers of the text. The verse does not simply list random numbers. Instead, it encodes every number it mentions. Incredibly, each number announces itself at precisely the distance it describes. The question is no longer whether a hidden Bible code exists. The evidence presented here points to a genuine and verifiable mathematical design, and I will continue to present my comprehensive findings and the insights that emerge from them. The more I examine the text, the more extraordinary its numerical architecture appears. The beauty of mathematics lies in its objectivity. Mathematical truths remain true regardless of who examines them or what they believe. Unlike matters of faith or opinion, they are either correct or incorrect. They do not change, no matter how rigorously they are challenged. The precision and elegance of these patterns reveal an underlying order unlike anything we could have imagined.